Welcome to the Leadership with Biana Kovic Show, and thank you for being with us. Our topic, leadership, focuses on leaders such as yourselves. We believe that leadership is a skill that can be learned through practice and awareness. It is our hope that our conversation will help you become more reflective when it comes to your own leadership practices and enable you to leave a positive legacy. Our very special guest is Adriaan Groenewald. Adriaan is a leadership masterclass presenter and a leadership activist. For the past 20 years, Adriaan has been interviewing all types of top leaders and experts from different media platforms. Adriaan is also a leadership author with several published books and hundreds of published articles. He is co-founder and CEO of Leadership Platform and co-founder of Global Leadership Platform, a social media platform focused on leadership. Adriaan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Biana. Great to be with you.
Adriaan, I'm very excited that you are with us tonight. You are the CEO of the Leadership Platform and also one of the biggest influencers in leadership. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your company, Leadership Platform, and how did you start it on leadership path?
Biana, about 20 years ago, we started Leadership Platform, and our mission is to multiply leaders in order to move society. Whenever you multiply leaders or leadership, positive leadership, authentic leadership, then movement happens, positive movement. So that's the mission of Leadership Platform. But we didn't want to create a global consulting business, so we started another one called Think Lead, Pty Limited. And Think Lead's job is to take leadership to the world digitally. And we've certainly started doing that over the last year or two. We want a global leadership conversation. We work with top leaders. We interview leaders as well. We try and find out exactly what we need in order to turn around this global leadership crisis that I think we find ourselves in.
So how do you multiply leaders and the leaders that are really good in leading others? Because there are lots of leaders that are not very good example of leadership.
Yeah, unfortunately, in our world today, unauthentic and toxic and incompetent leaders or individuals often rise to the top into leadership positions, and they aren't necessarily authentic or valuable, effective leaders. And that's very sad. In terms of multiplying leaders, we have come to understand after doing lots of programs and coaching and writing a lot and all of that, that the one essence one should focus on is to help an individual discover, define, and then try and become their best self. So every human being have their worst self inside of them or their best self. And if you can help someone discover their best self, then every time they act in congruence with that best self, they will lead. Be it themselves, be it their family, be it employees, wherever they are, they will lead from where they stand. Being your best self is the trick, is to get people to dig in and find who they really are.
So are there any traits to help one become the best self?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because if you find your best self, then you will be patient. You can't be impatient unless you're impatient with something wrong. If you find your best self and you act according to your best self, you will be kind. You will be strong when you need to be. You'll have integrity. You will be fearless. Your worst self is scared. Your best self is courageous. Your worst self will be dishonest, even in small things. Your best self will be honest. So you can almost bring everything back to Biana and Adriaan and who else out there to just discover their best self. And therefore, your first leadership attribute is a very deep sense of self-awareness of who I really am. When I discover who I really am, I discover more, and then I discover more and more, and it just goes deeper and deeper and higher and higher.
So what you're saying to us, you have to be self-aware and know your blind spots.
Correct. The more self-aware you become, the more you understand your weaknesses and your strengths, the more confident you are, authentically confident, not a projected confidence that is actually an insecurity or an insecure person. That's not the way you walk. It's not the way you talk. Those things come naturally. The more you go inside and you discover yourself inside, the more confident you are to ask for feedback, the more confident you are to ask for people to tell you what your blind spots are, as opposed to being a CEO of a major organization or the president of a country, and because you never discovered your best self, no one will dare tell you what your blind spots are.
So my question is, you mentioned toxic leaders, and I am in New York, you're in South Africa, and we have a lot of toxic leadership here in New York. And I was wondering, are there any advice that you can give folks who are working with toxic leaders, how they can protect themselves or how can they make their environment better?
No, that's such a good question because it's difficult when you're a junior to someone and they have authority and power over you and they can determine your next increase or your next promotion, and they are toxic and they are destructive and they are selfish. It's very difficult for any person to take them on. I think the first is to honestly find yourself, because the more authentically confident you are inside yourself and the more you act in accordance with your own best self, the stronger you will become in order to deal with that situation, in order to stand up to that leader in a mature way, because usually people struggle to not adopt the behaviors of their toxic leader. So when the toxic leader puts unhealthy pressure on people through threats or anything like that, then it's very difficult for me to not threaten my own people because I'm being threatened. So it's very important that I become absolutely sure about who I am, how I lead, and not to allow a toxic leader to influence me to lead the way he or she is leading. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you can't get away from needing to be courageous, needing to talk to that leader yourself. And maybe the time will come where you may have to sacrifice yourself in some way by going over their head if you need to, if that person is destructive to the organization. And there are times when you have to leave. If you cannot change the culture, if you cannot influence broader than yourself, after ticking the first box of knowing who I am, then you might have to leave. And that's also courageous when you don't have a growing economy, when it's not easy to find a job out there, when it's not easy to start your own business. There is no easy way around toxic leaders that are above you. And that's why it's so dangerous. That's why we must try and stop it in any way possible.
So I like that you said courageous and you might have to pack up your stuff and also not being swayed in their direction. But is there a balance you can strike, or are there ways that you can manage up the toxic leader?
Yeah, here in South Africa, we had a deputy president, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was working for a very toxic leader, Jacob Zuma, the president of our country, with the greatest of respect, who I met. And I've interviewed President Zuma, our president, and several years ago, and he disappointed me hugely in how he led our most gorgeous country in the world almost. And the president we've got now seems to be, I want to say, as good as they get. By the time a politician rises to the top, very often they are so tainted and lost so much of their moral compass and lost who they really are. But this man, in my view, is very close to as authentic perhaps as you can be. Now, the challenge he had was he was being the deputy president, and he was potentially somewhat aware of some of the toxic behaviors happening, but he had to try and do something with it or about it while navigating himself carefully so that he will not be destroyed before he can take over that seat as the president. Now, how he did that, how he didn't lose his moral compass totally during this process, I don't know. But what I do know is somehow you have to be politically savvy. You have to not sell your own principles and values out in the process. But there are times when you can't just blindly stand up and proclaim the leader above you as wicked and toxic, and in that process sacrifice yourself. If you are potentially the one who can take over and improve things, then you've got to be a little bit political savvy. And I don't know that that's easy to teach someone. It's a fine line, Biana, especially in politics, because you can start rationalizing anything and say, I'm going to have to turn a blind eye to almost everything just so that I can get to that seat. And maybe you lose your motives as to why you're on your way there anyway, because power corrupts, absolutely.
So you got to be more diplomatic, what you're saying to us, and kind of wait for the right time, right?
Correct. And that is just such a dangerous route to go on between right and being diplomatic, being just absolutely honest and speaking your mind and ruining your chances of getting into that position where you can actually influence broader and wider. And it's a fine line conversation, because some people say, no, you just speak your mind and whatever happens, happens. Well, it's easy to say, but if you honestly can't possibly take over a country as a president that has been destroyed in 10 years almost, where corruption has gone so deep into society, and you know that you can turn it around, you really want to, your desires are in the right place, but you can't stand up and destroy yourself before you get there. It's very easy to judge someone from a distance. And it could be the same in corporate, could be the same in a management position, it could be the same in many other positions, that you've got to be a little bit more diplomatic without losing focus on morals and values.
It's so interesting that you talked about corruption. I actually worked for an organization that had a corruption. And, even when you try to change the culture as a new leader, you get a lot of pushbacks. How do you do that? I mean, you can have a not so good leader and then you get a good leader and then he's trying to change it, but people are used to it on old ways.
Yeah, we teach leaders the law of movement, that leaders are in the business of movement. So it's a universal law like gravity. It's absolutely universal. But with the universal law of movement, as you create movement, you have resistance. And that's the nature of our world. As a leader, the more movement you create and the bigger the impact of your movement, the more resistance, you'll always get pushback. That is part and parcel of life, but certainly of leadership. So you cannot try and change the culture of an organization or to fight evil or toxicity or corrupt leaders and not have huge pushback and resistance. It's just going to happen. So are you willing to sacrifice a lot to create that kind of movement and work through that opposition and resistance? Or are you willing to go and take a cushy job somewhere? I mean, we all want different things, but don't try and create movement and be a leader who changes an environment and a culture and a bigger picture and expect it's going to be a holiday resort. But if you are in the big picture and remain true to who you are, remain your best self, when you make mistakes, apologize, move forward, find solutions, and just be a good person.
And it's so interesting. I never heard of the expression law of movement because, when I was in that organization, I was always wondering, how long do you stay and try to change things when the resistance is so strong? And unfortunately, I was not successful. So in the law of movement that you talked about, is there a time frame that you say to leaders, okay, there is resistance and maybe you can try to fight it or to work through it or to get the people on your side, but after 9 months, after a year, 2 years, you just have to move on?
No, there isn't. I mean, I look at Nelson Mandela here in our country, who was willing to sit in jail for 27 years. So what it is about is your depth of motivation. So the law of movement says simply, and this is our law, all movement is governed. It's determined by the integration or the coming together of only three things: motivation, direction, and structure. So for anything to move, there must be a motive, a reason, a desire, a spark, an energy. There must be a direction, there must be goals, there must be plan, strategy, and there must be structure, resources, systems, processes, money, buildings, whatever, computers. So as a leader, it is about how deep my motivation is. How motivated am I to create this movement that is standing before me, that is staring me in my face? How motivated am I? And the deeper my motivation, the clearer and the harder I would work at my direction and my plans, and the more I would work at finding structures and resources to make it happen. But I will make all three of those things come together, and I'll let it happen. And if it takes my lifetime, if it takes a year, 3 years, so it's not a timing thing, except if the world places timing on you. So I'm a CEO. They're giving me 3 years to turn around this organization. Or I'm a president. I have 5-year term, maybe a second term, to turn around this country. Well, that's the time frame. That's how fast I need to turn it around. And who knows how much motivation, direction, and structure you need on all levels of your organizational society to make that movement happen. And most leaders are good at motivating, not good at directing. Some are good at directing, not good at motivating. Some are good managers of structure, not so good at motivating. So that's why I have my team, so that we can motivate, direct, and structure.
And when you talk about motivate, direct, and structure, is there like that you need more of motivation or more of direction or more of structure, or it's evenly distributed?
The order of importance would be exactly like that. The most important one is motivation. The second most important one is direction. And the third most important one is structure. If I came over to you in New York and my motivation was to come and meet this woman and to really sit with Biana and get to know her, that'll be my motivation. My direction would be New York. My structure would be my car to the airport, the airplane, all the way to you, a land car. Now, I can be as motivated as I want to get to you, and I can know exactly where New York is. But if I don't have a car, and I've got no Uber, and I've got no airplane, I cannot move. So they are all three exceptionally important. But the problem we have in today's world is very often when you put structure in place, resources, systems, processes, procedures, we start serving those. Bureaucracy takes over. And when there's a problem, when someone is not performing or an organization is not working or a country, we must first go look for the problem under motivation. And more often than not, if you can instill motivation, connect with the deepest motives of people back to self-awareness, then they will be motivated enough to find the directions and the structures.
Just to bring it to the organizational level, when people are not motivated, we have a work improvement plan we put them on, which actually demotivates even more. So it's very interesting that you talked about it. Yeah. What would be your advice to organizations that are very set on work improvement plans, corrective actions, plans for their workers? Do you think that's working or not working for organizations?
So if someone is not performing, not moving, performing is just a synonym. It's just a replacement word for movement. So everything is movement. Then the first thing I need to do is just sit down and find out what motivates you, what really makes you tick. Let me understand you as a human being, but we don't have time for that, firstly. So we end up putting structures in place to manage people or to check on them or to somehow get them to move. And we skip that important element of connecting with their deepest self, their best self. Call upon their best self. And when you do that, you discover things about them that they don't even know about themselves potentially. And then you never have to turn to structure necessarily. You never have to come with corrective meetings and follow-up meetings and warnings and disciplinary action. And the reason we get to those structural approaches is because we lack so much in sitting with someone and actually just digging into the motivation side of things. I know my motives as a manager or leader. I know the organization's motives. Now let me honestly understand what your deepest values and motivations are as a human being. And you know what? I bet you we connect somewhere. Let's find a way to connect.
Interesting. And to connect with someone, you need time. And I think on this side of the world, we all sort of strapped for time. We always say we don't have time. So how do you create that time as a leader to actually connect with someone and create connection before you start putting structure?
You're right. The world is not going to offer time on a platter to us. In fact, the world is moving away from time. So we have to get better at prioritizing what matters most as leaders. And therefore, the shortcut is to connect with people. So it means I must have regular one-on-ones and I must try and get to know Biana really well and ask the right questions and really care and all of that. And then I think, I don't have time for that. I'm in so many meetings. But the shortcut is to, in fact, connect with the person's heart, to connect with their deepest motives. The leaders who catch on to that, they do miracles because they have motivated, inspired people, so they multiply their time, they multiply their effort. And in today's world, I think we have a huge leadership crisis. I think there's a revolution against leaders, in fact, against leadership. And that's why we've created this global leadership platform, which we think will become the social media focused on leadership. We think it's time to harness the power of social media platforms and functionality and have a global leadership conversation on leadership. So we've got global leadership platform, and we need this global conversation, this global awareness. We need to start doing things differently. Leaders are being caught out because they aren't being authentically connected with their people, and therefore they are not motivating them enough, and things are falling apart.
It's so interesting because, there is so much talk about leadership. People are constantly talking about leadership, but I do agree with you. They don't practice their talk. So how do you support people in separating that persona that they're trying to portray in media and actually doing the work?
Yeah, fortunately, we're a very exposed society. We're a very interconnected society. So now we can all talk to each other and we can call out leaders who are not being authentic, who are not real, who are not creating movement by starting with motivation and connecting on motives, and who are saying things but not doing the same thing. And because of that voice, if you're a leader thinking that you can still say one thing but do another thing, well, the world is catching on. The world is starting to call you out and expose you. So that's also dangerous because then you have masses who have a certain power and they taste it. And then if I just don't like a leader, and I have 1 million followers on Twitter, I can just try and destroy their reputation by saying something without having the facts straight. So there's a pro and a con to this discovery of voice by the masses. So we've got to find a way to escalate the leadership conversation, awareness and improvement and development in the world.
So I want to segue and talk a little bit about your book, Seamless Leadership. And I was wondering if you can share one lesson from the book.
Seamless leadership is boundaryless leadership. Seamless leaders are authentic. They are the ones I talk of. Seamless leaders have no boundaries and somehow manage to do the impossible all the time. Where people see boundaries, they see opportunity. Where people see boundaries, they realize it's an illusion and they walk through it. The lesson we've learned from Nelson Mandela was this impossibility thinking, this incredible ability to see the big picture and to unite around an impossible goal and achievement, and the ability to get the best self out of others. And then together we do the impossible. And that is at the heart of seamless leadership.
So what I'm hearing is being able to communicate so effectively that you bring people that are against you on your side.
Yeah, a seamless leader has a way of reacting counterintuitively. So, Biana, you offend me. The intuitive response is to offend you back and to try and hurt you back. Seamless leaders, their counterattack is to totally surprise you by showing love, by showing care or not cursing back at you. And Nelson Mandela had that impact, where the intuitive response was to hate and to fight back and to let the black South Africans rise above the white South Africans and put them in their place. He said, no, let's forgive and let's pull together and take this country forward, united as a rainbow nation. And ultimately, that is what we need today. Leaders who look beyond boundaries, who look beyond prejudice, leaders who can manage polarity, leaders that do the impossible. Others think it's not possible, but they just make it happen. We've had such a great example in our country, and then it was ruined over a decade or so. But in fact, very few political leaders across the world are seamless leaders.
And just to bring it out to the organizational level, how would you use seamless leadership? If someone is being very dismissive and rude and abusive, how would you deal in that respect?
It might depend on your position towards that person. So if you're a colleague, we're on the same level. If you're a subordinate, or if you're their boss. So depending on where you sit on those levels, it might depend on how you treat that sort of behavior. So if you're their boss, you praise in public, but you correct in private, as an example. So I've had that where I, as a young manager, made mistakes in that someone defied me in a meeting, and I was taught to be kind and gentle and love your neighbor and all those nice things, which are wonderful. But it's not a place to be kind, but it's a time to be firm, but not to try and destroy their reputation in front of others, which would be what they do. To say, okay, can we just call her into this meeting for now, guys? Just give us a moment. John, would you please join me outside? So people see you're confronting it, you're not scared or weak, but they don't hear what happens on the outside. And that immediately creates a respectful environment even between you and that individual, because they realize you could have called them out in front of everyone. And on the outside, you let them understand very firmly that that was not acceptable. And even then, you don't assume that they just did it with the worst intent. That person may have had their wife tell them that morning that they have cancer. That person may have had a child, I don't know, something awful happened to them and they are acting out of character. And we must always, as leaders, as individuals, assume the best in people, sure, and give them an opportunity to respond before we attack them and judge them, because there could be a myriad of things that impacted their out-of-character behavior. It's not easy on the spot. It's not easy under pressure when someone embarrasses you and your ego has been affected. But if I'm a healthy, authentic, best self type of person and someone offends me, then I'm going to be in control and I'm going to try to not offend back, but take this person on. It's not easy. Even I don't understand fully the pure behavior of a perfectly seamless leader.
But I like because you're saying to us, seek to understand and don't jump to conclusions.
Yeah. What stops me from seeking to understand is that my ego has been dented or been bruised. So that's what stops me from actually seeking to understand. So your response is always in accordance with how you feel about yourself, how you as a leader are feeling on that day. Are you in a good place? Your reaction is very much based on your own frame of mind on the day, but also in general. Do I feel healthy about myself? Do I have a healthy self-image about who I am? If I don't, my response will be quite negative.
So be curious and check your temperature, right? Your leader's temperature.
Yeah, I mean, that's a constant thing. And it's so easy to talk on the show, Biana, it's easy to talk about it. But wow, the pressure that leaders are under from all angles. We then expect them to always respond maturely and kindly and gently and strongly and courageously. It's not always going to happen. I'm going to lose my cool. The performance is not coming. And if the performance is not coming, my team must expect of me to have a tougher conversation with them. They must. If they don't want me to have a tough conversation with them when they're not performing, well, then they've got to go grow in their own maturity. And if they're expecting a perfect leader to never, ever lose his or her cool, well, that's also an immature expectation. But if I lose my cool, am I willing to apologize? Am I willing to turn around and say, I'm so sorry. I lost it there a bit. I'll try not to do it again. And please forgive me. That is as powerful as anything.
Any final thoughts for us?
Final thoughts are find a quiet time regularly. I'm lucky enough, I live next to Kruger National Park. Look out my window, I see bush around me. So it's easier to find that quiet moment within an authentic environment. If you can, break away, go into nature, find an authentic environment so that you can think authentically about your best self. Think, who am I really? If I had to take away all the negative intruder influences in my life, and I had to somehow find that authentic, real best self, Adriaan, who is that person? Describe that person, write it down, and then try and be that person every day of your life. And then on top of that, learn to create movement. Because I can be kind and gentle and wonderful, but if I don't move the organization forward, if I'm not willing to be tough when I need to be tough, if I don't motivate, direct, and structure, then I'm just a nice guy. I must be a nice guy who creates movement. And that nice guy must be the real me, the authentic, best self me. I cannot stress that enough. I think it's one of the most important missions and leadership projects in any leader's life is to find your best self all the time. And every day, every morning when you wake up, try and connect with that best self. Try and connect with that best self and go into the world and help others be their best selves so that you together can turn your organization into its best self, or your cause into its best self, or your country into its best country. It's all about starting with me.
Interesting. So your mission is then finding your best self.
Now, my mission in life is to make the world a better place through improved leadership. And that means for individuals to discover their best selves, to know how to create movement. And I can't say enough, www.thinklead.app. More and more people will hear about the Global Leadership Platform, a global platform for leadership conversation from a societal, organizational, and individual level. I want authentic leadership to return. I want authentic leadership to fight back against this toxic, weak leadership in the world. We need to bring that out in people.
Great. And Adriaan, one more time, how can people contact you and access your platform? Can you give us a website?
Yeah, leadershipplatform.com is our website. People can always email me, I'm Adriaan@leadershipplatform.com. One word, 2 P's in the middle. And to join the global leadership conversation, thinklead.app. And then you register. Immediately the register page comes up. Register on the global leadership platform and share your thoughts. It's like a social media platform on leadership, and you'll certainly see me on that platform.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adriaan, for being a guest.
Thank you for holding global leadership conversations, Biana. You're doing it from wonderful New York, and it's one of those standout cities, as we know, in the world, and you're reaching out to all the corners of the earth to have leadership conversations, and that is definitely contributing to a better world.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Our special guest was Adriaan Groenewald, Leadership Masterclass presenter, leadership activist, co-founder and CEO of Leadership Platform, and co-founder of Global Leadership Platform. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Leadership with Biana Kovic Show. Remember that you're all leaders in your own rights, and the impact that you're meant to achieve starts with small acts of kindness, curiosity, and generosity. Please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you again, and until next time.